Hi everyone! Who wants to bake some cinnamon buns? From my last video that I posted a few days ago, there were quite a few comments that asked for me to show or do a class on the cinnamon buns that I bake every Tuesday. So here it is. There have been some people that have said, oh my goodness, you're not going to give away your recipe. And I always say I found the recipe online years ago, so I don't really own it. However, over the years, I have made changes and I do little tricks that if I give you the recipe on paper, those aren't in it. Today, by watching the video, you're going to get to learn some of those, or not some, all of those tricks. So this cinnamon bun recipe is called 1 hour cinnamon buns. I actually, if you follow the recipe to the letter, you get cinnamon buns, delicious buns, in an hour. I do it a little bit longer. I wake up on Tuesday mornings at 4:30. In order for me to leave my house with the buns all done and ready to sell at school, I have to get up at 4:30 in the morning, which allows me to not only make the buns, but clean up my kitchen and get ready for school. How long the actual bun process takes, I've never really timed it from beginning to end. But I know it's a little bit more than an hour. Nonetheless, it's still a very easy recipe, and it has raised a lot of money for charity at the school, which I'm really pleased about. All right, so let's get started. For this first phase, because I'm going to do it in chunks, and this is just simply to get the yeast prepared for the dough, you are going to need some water, the temperature of a really, really warm bath. You don't want hot, hot, hot water because that will kill the yeast. You're going to need some yeast. I like to use Fleischmann's quick rise yeast that you see in this jar. You're going to need some vegetable oil. You're going to need some sugar. My container is almost empty, so I'll be able to wash it after this. A large spoon, 1 tablespoon, and then you will need 1 cup and 1 3/4 cup, 1 3/4 cup. Oh, and I forgot, I need a 1/2 cup. 1/4 cup, I'm sorry, 1/4 cup. There's my 1/4 cup, close my cupboard. All right, the first thing that you need to do is get your water, which I have already done in this big bowl. And so the recipe calls for 3.5 cups of water. That being halved is 1 3/4 cup of, like I said, warm water. Then you're going to, the normal recipe calls, okay, I'm just going to speak in the half terms. So you're going to take a 1/4 cup of vegetable oil. Those of you that want to do a full batch, the measurements are in the recipe printed. So I'm going to put a 1/4 cup of oil in my warm water. Then I'm going to take, now this is a little tricky because I'm not a math girl. Those of you that have had me as a teacher, you know this. I'm not sure what half of a 3/4 cup, because the regular recipe calls for 3/4 cup of white sugar. I'm only making half a batch, I just need half. So I just eyeball it when I do a half. If some of you know exactly what half of 3/4 is, let me know. I don't think I would have a measuring cup for that, but so if you get a little bit of extra sugar, that is not a big deal. So that is what I have. The sugar is going to help activate the yeast. So I'm going to put that in my oil and my hot water. Then I'm going to take my yeast, which when you open the jar, and if you don't use all your yeast, it has to be stored in the fridge. And I'm going to measure out 3 tablespoons, and I'm going to sprinkle the yeast on top of the water and oil and sugar. Just sprinkle like that. There's 3. Close it up. And now I'm going to take my large spoon and I'm going to stir it a few times just to mix in that oil, sugar, and yeast. And it'll be almost instant that you're going to see the yeast come alive. So now I'm going to set my timer for 15 minutes and let that yeast activate, and I will clean up my area. And I'll see you in a bit. So my timer has gone off. I'm gonna shut it off. And I just want to show you what the yeast looks like. So this is what it should look like in your bowl. And now we're going to mix up the dough. All right, we are ready to actually make the dough. I think I forgot to mention at the beginning of the video, I'm only doing half a batch today. A full batch makes 24 large buns, so a half a batch makes 12. And because I am on my own, I'm the only one here, and I don't know for how long, there's no way I can eat 24 buns. I'm not even sure I can eat 12 or should eat 12, so they'll probably go in the freezer. Anyway, only doing a half a batch. So if you have a small family, you might want to do half a batch as well, but a full batch makes 24. Okay, as you see, my yeast is ready. It has been activating for 15 minutes. So this next step, the dough step, we are going to need 2 eggs. The complete recipe asks for 3 eggs. I decided I would put 2 eggs in, and it works out fine. You're going to need some salt, some flour, and a little bit of oil once your dough is ready. And then of course your spoon that you already had, a knife, a tablespoon, 1 cup, and a 1/4 cup. Now I recommend that you measure your flour out in a separate bowl before you add it to the yeast. I do this for several reasons. If I'm measuring a complete batch, which is 10.5 cups of flour, it's very easy to lose count. And so you could be measuring out your flour and you think, oh my goodness, was that 8 cups or was that 7 cups? And so if you put it in a separate bowl, then you're good to go. And also to expedite my early morning Cinnamon Bun Tuesday bakes, I have a bowl, not this one, but I have a bowl that I know when I just dump in flour and I get it to a certain level, then that is 10.5 cups. And so I don't even measure anymore. My bowl is the actual measurement. Today I'm using this bowl and I'm going to measure out 5 1/4 cups of flour. So if you were watching my last video for the cookies, and some of you made it, thank you for posting your pictures. I like to measure my flour with my flat edge of my knife. I overfill it, I tap, and then I level it off. So that's 1. Also remember, I guess I didn't say at the beginning, but we need to always be washing our hands. I've washed down all my surfaces. I want to be extra clean this time. There's 2. Getting rid of all the air pockets. There's 3. There's 4. I'm up to the 5th one. I'll be able to wash out my flour container too. That's 5. And then I need my 1/4 cup. Okay, 5 1/4 cups of flour in this bowl. Now, I had mentioned that hot water can kill yeast, so does salt. So whether I'm doing a full batch or a half a batch, I put my salt in my flour. I don't put it directly onto the yeast. And the full batch calls for 1 tablespoon. In order to do a half, I eyeball it. Okay, and if I get a little too much, I just pour it out. And my garbage is right here in front of me. I don't want to spill it. So I have about half a tablespoon of salt. And I'm going to put it in my flour. I'm just going to take my measuring spoon and I'm going to just quickly mix in that salt so that when the flour goes into my bowl of my yeast, it doesn't directly touch my yeast and then kill it. Okay, so my salted flour is in this bowl. I'm now going to take my 2 eggs and I am just going to carefully, I don't want any shells in my buns, I'm going to carefully open them up and plop it right in. And as soon as I do that, you will see that the yeast starts to kind of deflate a little bit. And so there is 2 eggs in my yeast. Now, hopefully you have used a big bowl. I should have said that at the beginning. For this, you want a big bowl. Normally I would use my mixer, but I'm going old school and we're going to do this by hand. Now I'm just simply going to put in probably, well, it's a big enough bowl. So for this, I'm going to just dump everything right in. Okay, so this stage, the mixing and the kneading stage, it takes 10 minutes. And so if I were doing this in my big mixer, I would, once all my flour and my eggs are in the mixer and I turn my mixer on, I pop over and I set my timer for 10 minutes and I watch it. I don't just walk away, but I watch it, but I let it go the full 10 minutes with my dough hook. Sometimes I might have to sprinkle a little bit of flour if it's sticking to the sides, but usually at the end of the 10 minutes, it comes out, it doesn't stick to my hook, it doesn't stick to my bowl, it is done. So I use that 10-minute time even for kneading by hand. I just might have to use a little bit of extra flour. And some of you might think, oh, I don't need the whole 10 minutes, it looks ready. You need the whole 10 minutes because the kneading process activates the gluten. And I'll show you what you want your dough to look like at the end of the 10 minutes. Okay, so I am going to mix in by a hand in the bowl. I'm going to stir in my eggs and my flour, salted flour. And I want to stir until it just becomes difficult and heavy to mix. That's when the kneading. And so I'm going to set my timer right now for 10 minutes. And I am not going to stop stirring or kneading until that timer goes off. And depending on how fast I knead or how strong or weak my arms are, I might need to go longer than the 10 minutes because I want my dough to look a certain way and to have a certain feel. That way I know the gluten has been activated. So on my clean countertop, I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of flour. I'll leave that open if I need to. Oh, and then I'm going to empty my bowl out onto the flour. So this is actually fun. I don't do it nearly that often, only when I'm making buns when I don't have a mixer available. Again, clean hands. And so I'm just going to, it's almost like playing with Play-Doh. Hopefully you can see this on the video. So I am gathering it up in a ball. And then really kneading is about using this portion of your hand. So I'm pushing in, I turn it around, I fold it over, and I push it in. And I'm just going to maintain that. So you push forward with your heel, turn it around, flip it over, and just keep doing that over and over again. And right away, I notice that my dough is really starting to form. Hopefully you can see that. And like I said, there might be some people that say, oh, we're done, the dough is all mixed in. But we're not done. We really need to, like I said, activate that gluten. And you know you've got it activated when, and again, you might have to continue to flour your bowl, your countertop. You know that it is done when the dough, it's not sticky anymore. It almost has an elasticity, is that a word? Elasticity to it. And it's going to have like a little shine. Some would say smooth as a baby's bottom. And if I look over at my timer, oh my goodness, I still have 7 minutes to go. So I will be back with you. And at the end of the 10 minutes, and I will show you what the dough is going to look like. So, see you in a bit. Hey everyone. So, the timer is about ready to go off, and I have been kneading the whole time. So if you can kind of tell on my countertop, there isn't any more flour. My dough is very, very smooth. It's not sticking to my hands or to the countertop. I have kneaded it and the gluten is activated and it is going to rise to a nice fluffy dough. So with my pinky finger, turn that off. Try to. Yeah, there. I'm gonna wash my hands, timer. So before we move on to the next phase, and that's letting the dough rise, I just want to, I'm not gonna put it back in my bowl. Some people might. If they do, you want to grease your bowl. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a little smidgen of oil, vegetable oil that I used in the dough, on my countertop, and I'm just going to cover a surface. And then I'm just going to coat my dough in that oil, and I'm just going to pat it down. Nice, very pretty. There's something quite satisfying about kneading bread, and it makes me appreciate my grandmother or my great-grandmother for doing it several times a week for their bread because they didn't buy it. And then I'm going to take a clean tea towel, shake it out, just make sure there isn't any fuzz. And then I'm going to lightly cover my dough with the tea towel. And I'm not going to touch it. What we want is we want this dough to rise, double in size. The printed recipe says, I think 10 minutes to let it rise. This, and on Tuesday morning, this would be the stage where I would run and shower and get ready for school. So I don't set the timer. I just, when I come back, it's done. So if you want to set your timer for about 10 minutes, go right ahead. I'm going to clean up and I'm going to get ready for the next phase, getting our cinnamon mixture and our butter ready for our buns. So we'll see you in a bit. All right, so while our dough is rising, and it's right over here, we are going to prepare our butter and our sugar cinnamon mixture for the actual buns. The other day in baking club, or almost every day, we talk about how to measure butter if you have it in a block like this. So even though I'm not great at math, I can do this. I've taught the students that if you are measuring, most of my recipes are 1 cup, half a cup, quarter cup of butter. And I don't need a measuring cup for that because this pound of butter is actually 2 cups. So therefore, by cutting in halves over and over again, I can get my 1 cup measurement, my half cup measurement, and my quarter cup measurement. So for our yummy cinnamon filling, we need a quarter cup of melted butter for just the half batch. And if you're doing a full batch, you would need that times 2. So I'm going to cut my pound of butter in half, like I just did that. And then I'm going to cut that half in half, and then the half in half again. So there's no messy measurements with measuring cups, which is what I love. And there is a quarter cup of butter. So I'm going to put this quarter cup of butter in just a regular cereal bowl. And when it comes time, I will put a piece of wax paper over top of it and I will melt it in the microwave before I put it on my dough. So I'm eventually going to need some more butter for the frosting, but until then, I'm going to just set it aside over there. And if you forget to take your butter out of the fridge, I usually take mine out the night before. If I forget though, it's harder to cut because it's so cold. And so you can still use it. You just have to microwave it a little bit longer to melt it. And then you would have to soften the butter for your frosting as well. But if you have taken it out the night before, you should be good to go. All right, now the cinnamon sugar mixture. So for this, you need your white sugar and you need a 1/2 cup. I've got some butter on my hands. This is where Quentin, if you're watching, this is where he'd say, "Can I wash my hands?" And you can. I usually just power through and I wash them when it's done. So there's my 1/2 cup, my full, complete 1/2 cup of sugar. So that's going to go in my cereal bowl. Now this is where I really deviate from the recipe. I think the written recipe calls for a teaspoon maybe of sugar. So here's a spoon that I would eat cereal with or ice cream. I buy my cinnamon in big containers. This is how much cinnamon I use. That is way more. So I use that for just a 1/2 of a batch. And so I'm going to put that in. And so then I have this. And so now I'm just going to carefully stir that back and forth so that I get a nice sugar cinnamon mixture. I think the very first time I made the recipe course, I followed the recipe to the letter. And they were yummy, But I thought, it needs a little bit more cinnamon. And so I just decided to go for it and whip my spoon in there and a heaping spoonful. And so if I were doing the complete batch, I would have 2 of these and 2 of these ready to go. And I would have them sitting on my countertop, which is what I have now for 1/2 a batch. So I'm going to clean things up, and by that time, the dough should be ready to spread out and create the buns. I'll see you in a bit. Okay, I'm back. So I have my countertop cleaned again. I've washed my hands several times. I have now in front of me the cinnamon sugar mixture. I have a sharp knife, so if you're doing this and you're one of my students, make sure that you have an adult to help you, especially if you're not used to using knives. And my dough is still covered. We're gonna take a look and I'm gonna lift it up. And that is really kind of cool. It's very nice and smooth and it's doubled in size. So now I am ready to spread it out. And so I've kind of angled the camera. Hopefully you can just toss that over there. You can see my surface. So if I were doing a full batch, this is where I would break it into 2 halves. And I would set 1/2 aside and work with just 1/2 at a time. But because I'm only doing 1/2 a batch, then there's no splitting the dough. I'm just going to simply spread it. I have my butter in my microwave and I'm going to melt my butter. You're gonna say, what is that amount for? I've just realized that 38 seconds for the soft butter melts my butter perfectly. So I'm gonna set my microwave for 38 seconds. So I'm back with my melted butter. Remember, take that wax paper or something to cover your bowl. You don't want splattered butter all over your microwave. And as you can see, and we'll pop it up there, it is completely melted. I'm just going to set that aside and pop my wax paper into the garbage. Okay, with clean, that the best tool in the kitchen are your hands. as long as they're clean. So I'm going to simply take my hands. This is one of the most fun parts of this recipe. And I'm going to flatten it out, it's not even sticky, into a rectangular shape. But you want it as much of a rectangle as you can make it. You can even flip it over. Okay, can everyone see that? I have a nice rectangle. Now, some people might use a pastry brush for this, but my hands are clean, they've only touched the dough. I am careful, the butter can be quite warm. It does cool down quite quickly, especially once it touches the dough. So I want to try to get out as much of the butter as possible. Set that aside. Now I'm going to take my fingers and I'm going to spread the butter all over the dough. If the butter goes onto the countertop, not a big deal at all. Okay, so some of you might say, ooh, I've got to clean my hands. Like I said, I just kind of power through and you know, everything's clean. And now I'm going to sprinkle my cinnamon sugar all over the dough. Like this. So you want it. Oh, I love the smell of cinnamon. It's one of my favorite smells. And you can really smell it. Is there anything better than cinnamon, butter, and dough? I don't think so. And I'm gonna try to get it as evenly as possible. Again, if some of your cinnamon sprinkles out onto your countertop, that is not a big deal. Not a big deal. So we'll just take the rest and there. So you can see that some of the cinnamon has melted into the butter and some that's light has not. It's on top, not a big deal. So my hands are still buttery. So I'm going to now roll up the dough towards me. So I'm going to slowly, and then once it gets going, just rolls up like that. Now I'm gonna flip it over this way. And I want to tuck it in. So now I kind of, I don't know how to describe this process, but I want to make it into like a log. And so I take the ends, and so you can see that my hands are getting some of the cinnamon mixture. And so therefore on the outside of my roll is some cinnamon mixture, as well as some butter that was on my hands, but it's all good. And now I am ready to slice up this log into 12 equal, or I try to get them equal, rolls for the buns. So this is where I will wash my hands. So I'll be back in a minute. Now I have my knife and I need my baking sheet, which I'm going to use my stone, and it is lined with parchment paper. Ready to go off to the side. So how I cut my dough is eyeballing it, obviously. I first cut it right in the center to cut it into halves. So there. Then I cut one half into another half. So it's quarter, quarter, and then the second half, quarter. So I have 4 quarters. In order to get 12, what do we have to multiply 4 by to get 12? 3. So I'm going to cut each quarter section into, try to get them as equal as possible, 3 pieces. So there's 1, and I place it on my pan as I'm cutting like this. There's 2, do it on the side. And I have to trim it just a little bit like that. There's 3. Now, just a little word of caution. The portion of the bun that, like the end of the bun that attaches to itself, I turn those inward because as the dough starts to rise and separate on the pan, the ends will kind of spring out. And so if I turn them towards the center, when those little ends kind of separate themselves slightly from the dough, they're going to not come all the way out because they're going to touch the other bun. I don't know if that makes any sense. Okay, so I'm gonna quickly get the rest on my pan. And if some of them start to fall apart, that is not a big deal. You just pick it up like I am and kind of arrange it on your sheet and they will be just fine. Oh, these look so good. I hardly ever eat these myself because I make them for school and to give away as gifts to sell, so I never eat them. So I'm excited to try. And you'll notice, can you notice that a lot of the cinnamon has kind of started to run out? And so I just, before I put this dough onto the sheet, I kind of rolled it in the melted cinnamon butter mixture on my countertop. Make it nice and yummy. And there we go. Okay, so I'm gonna hold this up so you can see. So there, can you see that? There are my rolls. Now, this is the stage. Notice that we have not preheated our oven. When we made our cookies the other day, we preheated the oven before we started making the cookies. This is where I'm going to preheat my oven to 400 degrees. And while the oven is getting up to temperature, this allows my buns that I've just worked with the dough, so the dough is kind of deflated a little bit. This is going to allow the dough to actually have a second rise, which is going to make them nice and light and fluffy. So with my somewhat clean hand over here, I'm going to bake 400 degrees and start. So now I'm going to clean up, and I'll be back when it's time to put the buns in the oven. And now it is time to make the icing for when the buns are all baked. So this is a really important tip that I want to share with you. You want to choose a bowl to mix your icing in that can be popped into the oven. So you want it to be either glass, oven safe glass, or metal. If you mix your icing in plastic, you won't be able to put it in the oven, because that's one of my little tricks that I use. And again, normally I would use it in doing my mixer and pop my mixer bowl right in the oven, but we're doing it by hand today. So what you're going to need for the icing is some icing sugar. Now, this is a full kilogram bag. This whole bag would be for a full batch, 24 buns. I normally like to have the 500 gram bags on hand for my half batches, so I don't have to measure out icing sugar, because measuring icing sugar can be so messy. But today I just have my 1 kilogram bag. And then you're going to need some butter. You're going to need a little bit of salt, some vanilla, and some milk. All right. So because I'm a little lazy, and I've done this so many times, you need 3 cups. There are 6 cups in this kilogram bag. You need 3 cups for half a batch. So I'm going to, like I said, eyeball it just because I don't want to bother with measuring messy icing sugar. So I'm going to take, and I'm just going to plop in about half. Oh, there, I spilled it. So that is roughly 3 cups of icing sugar. Now I'm going to take 1/4 cup of butter. So I'd already measured my butter for my buns, and I had shown you about measuring. So there's my 1/4 cup of butter. I'm gonna plop that in. Then I'm gonna close my butter back up and set it aside. Then I'm going to take 1 teaspoon of vanilla. And I just broke my rule. I measured my teaspoon of vanilla over my bowl. Don't do that. I didn't spill it, thankfully. Okay. There we go. And I need a dash of salt. So what's a dash? Well, it's just a little bit of salt. So can everyone see that? That's about a dash. So I'm gonna pop that in. Now, before I add my milk, I want to very carefully, so that the icing sugar doesn't fly all up, I want to take, remember we talked about creaming with the fork? I want to take the back of my fork and I want to cream the butter, start mixing the butter in with the icing sugar, and I can see the vanilla in there as well. And I'm going to push it and smush it up the sides of the bowl. And so I can start to see like little pieces of butter in throughout my icing sugar. Now, there is no measurement for the milk. I apologize. It is just, you just want it to be, I don't know, like the consistency maybe of toothpaste, maybe a little thinner than that. And so what I do is I just pour in a little bit and I stir it up. And so I'm starting, it's looking like that. So I'm gonna pour in a little bit more, not a lot. You gotta use your elbow grease, as I say in baking class. I'm going to stir it up. And so when I look in, I can see little chunks of butter, but that's not a big deal because I'm going to be showing you what I do. I'm just going to add a little bit more milk, just a little bit. If you like a lot of frosting, you can actually, if you're doing a half a batch, you can actually make a full batch of frosting. Dump the whole bag in, half a cup of butter, 2 teaspoons of vanilla, a little bit more salt, and definitely a little bit more milk. If you like a lot of frosting, if you want your buns coated. Okay, so there is my frosting. It is all ready to go, and as you can see, it's a little bit runnier than toothpaste, I guess. So I really don't know how much milk that was. You just have fun, experiment. You really can't ruin it if you do a little bit at a time. So I'm going to set that aside for when the buns come out of the oven. And my oven is almost preheated, so I will see you in a bit when it's time to put the buns in the oven. All right, my oven is preheated to 400 degrees. Now it is time to pop these buns into the oven. So I just have 1 tray. If you have 2 trays, I know that you saw me on the other day with the cookies that I put 2 trays of cookies side by side in the top rack. For cinnamon buns, I'm not sure why, but I don't do that. I cook each tray individually. So in the oven they go. And I'm going to set my timer right in the center of the oven. I'm going to set my timer for 12 minutes. And I turn the light on and I will keep an eye on them, but I want them to be nice, just starting to get golden brown. I don't want them dark, dark, dark on top. So for my oven temperature at 400, it's 12 minutes. So we will be back and take a look at them when they come out of the oven. See you in a bit. So my timer just went off and I am ready to take the buns out of the oven. Get your oven mitts. And they look perfect. So see how they are just nicely starting to get golden brown on top. So I'm going to set them down. Now, here is the tip the little secret that I'm not sure why I started to do it actually, but if you eat a bun that I have made, I do this every time. I'm going to turn my oven off, and I'm going to take my frosting that is in an oven-safe bowl, and I'm going to pop it in the oven. That's off, but it still has a lot of heat in it. And I'm going to set the timer for 10 minutes. I'm actually going to melt the frosting for 10 minutes before I frost my buns. So I will see you in 10 minutes. Okay, so I'm back. So I've just taken my bowl of frosting out of my oven, and as you can tell, it has melted. And I'm going to stir it up. You might find, depending on how soft your butter was when you made your frosting, that there are little pockets of melted butter that you want to just mix in. And when I hold it up, see, it's nice and runny. And so that's why when you were mixing up your frosting and you might have had little chunks of butter, I told you not to worry about it because they are now melted. So here is the last stage to my cinnamon bun recipe. I'm going to notice I have my oven mitt still on, holding the handle of my mixing bowl because it's warm, it was in the oven. And I'm going to take spoonfuls of this melted icing, and I am going to drizzle it over the buns. And we are almost ready to eat. And these look delicious, if I do say so myself. And yours are going to look just as delicious too. It is super, super easy. It takes a little bit, but hopefully you will all agree they are worth the effort. And they're fun. You can do it with your family. Okay. So there. That is how I make the cinnamon buns. Let me see. Oh, my pan is still warm. These are warm buns. So I'm going to hold these up so you can see them. So there they are. Those are the cinnamon buns that you would eat if it was Cinnamon Bun Tuesday. So I'm going to indulge. I'm going to try one right now. Okay, let me try this. Oh my goodness. I never eat these. These are just delicious. I either sell these or I give them away. Yummy. That is really good. Okay, everyone. I hope you continue to stay safe. I hope you enjoyed this video. As I said before, post pictures. Tell me if you tried the recipe. If you have any questions, ask. Today I want to shout out to our school, our MCS custodians who cleaned the building really, really well for us last week. So thank you to Sheila, Marilyn, Vicki, Robert, Susan, and Megan. Let's do our part. Let's stay safe and stay at home and keep practicing our self-isolation and our social distancing, and know that we all miss you, and enjoy your time home with your families. Thank you. Bye-bye.